Hello, and thank you for joining us. My name is Mollie Carmichael with Zonda's Inspirational Leadership Series, joined by the industry's best in all things real estate. These leaders are literally designing our future for many generations to come with new communities, home designs, technology, retail centers, infrastructure, and so much more. This series is about who they are, how they got started, who inspired them, and their journey to the top. So let's get started. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. We are here with Joan Webb, who was previously the CMO for the New Home Company and has a huge history in home building. It's a pleasure to have you today, Joan. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you.
Thank you, Mollie. What an honor to be asked to participate, really.
Absolutely. So I want to start with just sort of looking back at your career for those that don't know you or don't know your history. Share a little bit about sort of the areas of what you have done with your career and all that you've been involved in. There's so much.
Okay. Well, I have a theory that unless you're born into or raised in a home building family, you don't wake up someday and go, I want to be a home builder. That was not a part of my path. I really thought I'd end up in the foreign service or something along those lines.
Foreign service.
Yes, because I was a human rights activist before I was a home builder. Actually, there were a few years that overlapped. I was vice chair of Amnesty International in the US, and I really thought my path was going to be human rights. And then along the way, life happens. And a very, very dear friend of mine, Lisa Stewart, comes from a family of home building, once called me up and said, I need help. This was in the late 1980s. Signature Homes was a bit forward for their time, and they had a design studio, on-site design studios, and they were overwhelmed with hundreds and hundreds of files that had not been processed of people's flooring choices. That was my entry into home building. And from there.
So at this point, you're a human activist, and your friend says, I'm going to call Joan because I have a studio issue.
Well, I was a human rights activist for Amnesty International. And at the same time, I had to earn a living. So I was also working in organization development for McDonnell Douglas.
Nice.
A little circuitous. And she called me and said, you got to come help me. But what's the rule? Don't work with best friends, which I've broken throughout my career.
Sure. Me too.
And yeah, so I took a leave of absence from what my friends called the bomb factory, and made a left turn and joined Lisa in the home building business. And Lisa's dad, Dale Stewart, at the time was president of NAHB. So my windows opened to things like NAHB and BIA and advocacy for our industry. And I never looked back. That was in 1987. And so my start was in the design studio business, which is a niche, and some builders really embrace it. Others, don't. Others outsource it. And my specialty was in-house. And from there, I had a terrific time at Taylor Woodrow. I'm now Taylor Morrison.
I remember that.
Yep. And then a stop, which was a very fascinating time at Brookfield Homes. And then Lang, when Larry Webb hired Tom Redwitz to start the Lang luxury line, Tom called me, and I had worked with him at Taylor Woodrow, and that kind of brings us up to Lang Luxury. Then that fun 2 years overseas with Omar when Lang sold to the company in Dubai. I went along with that. And then my last chapter, I was very fortunate to be with the New Home Company from the very start.
What are the key things you look for in great leadership? Like, what does that mean to you?
I think number one is leading from the heart. And what do I mean by that? I mean compassion. And compassion does not mean weak. It means understanding the human element. And that's super important for me. And if you don't have that, it's kind of hard to fill in with everything else. I think
Let me ask you one question on that.
Sure.
Why did you say it doesn't mean weak?
Because I think when people hear compassion, they think, who knows, maybe that's my upbringing or my story. When people would say compassionate, that doesn't usually first and foremost think of strength.
Gotcha.
And for me, a good leader has to start with the compassionate and the human element and leading from the heart. And then, yes, it has you lead with that, and then you get to have the strength that gives you the ability to make tough decisions. So
that exudes strength to me. Like when I just hear the word, it like feels strong.
Well, good. That's awesome. That's why we get along so well. And so compassion, strength, freedom for me through of how I wanted to be managed, and then in return how I wanted to manage and lead my teams. Freedom was essential to me. And I have no idea. I don't know if that's because my parents also raised me with this question authority thing, but they did. And so the freedom, what do I mean? Yes, everyone, I mean, great leaders are going to have their opinions, and they can't just let their people do whatever they want. But I always needed freedom to, if I was in the position to lead, to do what I thought was right. And yes, give me all of your opinions and give me your data and persuade me if it's an opposing view. But in the end, if you have me in the role of leading, then you better let me lead. Otherwise, that's not gonna work. So those are kind of those are my guiding principles.
So freedom in a way that it's almost sort of like, if I want to draw outside the lines because of this, that, or the other, I can do that, and you're going to trust me to do that, right?
Yes,
I totally get that.
And it tended to be not just around people choices. And for the most part, I always worked in organizations that really did trust my instinct, but it was about pushing and taking risks. And as long as I had a compelling, argument or story, I'll never forget walking in a big conference room full of men. And I was introducing the notion of doing landscape. Now, I mean, isn't that crazy? We can barely get like the shower tile to be correct in a house. And here, Joan wants to introduce fully customized landscaping designs. And this was at Lang Luxury. So starting price back then, it's hysterical. Yeah, $1 million is not exactly luxury today. But back then it was. And I actually had done my homework. I just didn't fly by the seat of my pants, which I often do. And I covered, risk and contract and DRE requirements and lender. I had it all packaged, and I sold it. And that was freedom to let me actually do something that had never been done before. Same thing with like trap fences. When I came up with that notion that I never wanted to see a trap fence, because if I had to trap someone into coming into our home or staying in our model 5 minutes longer, what's that about? And I think a lot of people rolled their eyes and said, well, and always in the preface of taking risk was, hey, if it doesn't work, you can change it back. Right? What the heck? So that for me is, those are examples of freedom that I was given in my career, and I think really, really gave me a huge amount of satisfaction in my job.
So you worked with a lot of different companies, albeit really notable, great companies. Which characteristics without saying the names, right? What were the characteristics of the best companies you worked for, and the characteristics of the companies you're like, this is just not going to work? And did you have really any that weren't going to work? But touch on that when you say like, I just couldn't do
that. Okay. I think the positives, first of all, 3 out of the 5 companies that I felt like I made an impression in my career, 3 of the 5 were led by basically similar, if not the same person. And so I knew what I had, and the trust was incredible. So how lucky was I? I grew of course through the years by going from design studio and then moving myself into sales and marketing and design. So I'd say that those companies had compassion, had strength, had just a craziness for quality. And that was something super important to me, because 5-10 years later, I always like to drive my neighborhoods. And if they looked like crap, I would cry. I mean, I just felt like if we were developers.
I get that. I totally get that.
If we were developers and builders, we better be great stewards of the land. I mean, we better leave that community a whole lot better than we found it. And so that quality and enduring design is what, right? When we go drive our neighborhoods 10 years later, the design is kind of what sticks. In the more challenging companies that I had the pleasure of serving, they just didn't have those fundamentals for me. Obviously, my experience overseas was amazing, and I worked with world-class architects and designers that I would never have even been able to touch.
I was going to ask you about Dubai, like what that experience was like.
When you have a hairstylist that you know by name in a foreign country in the Middle East, maybe it's time to leave. I was spending way too much time there. Crazy, exciting, often harrowing, and wanting to tear my hair out. Standing, in a meeting in Cairo and being sent by the chairman of the company to figure out why a JZMK designed home outside of Cairo doesn't look like the home in Irvine, California, and then standing in a meeting and not being able to be, I had to have a man speak for me, okay? Because culturally, they did not want to hear from an American, a woman, let alone the chairman liked to tell everyone in the company that I was Jewish. So yeah, that was a heck of an experience. So I actually made a friend with a guy who was an architect by trade, and he worked for the company. And so I would just whisper to him, and then he would present my,
Sounds like a company I once worked for too, just for the record. I won't use any names there, but yeah.
But the notion that the chairman of Amar had of buying John Lang and really taking that human capital and experience and spreading it throughout the world was not a bad idea. And I'm sure, on some level that was part of the good part of the things that Larry saw in wanting to make that deal, because really you could spread what we developed in Southern California as truly a leader in. It was all about design for these guys. They came to Southern California. They fell in love with places like the Grove and everything they saw in Irvine, everything they saw in Crystal Cove, Fashion Island. And they just wanted to duplicate that, not just in Dubai, but in their sphere of influence, which is basically the Middle East. So
why would they spend all that time having you travel to Cairo and yet you don't have a voice?
Yeah, because he didn't believe, they wouldn't believe me that they wouldn't listen to me because I'm dispatched by the chairman. Oh yeah, I used to tell him all the time, are you crazy? Don't ever send me there again. They're not going to listen to me. I mean, I can give you my personal report. He just wanted probably boots on the ground and a personal report. Same thing in, Morocco. I'll never forget. I was in the president of the Moroccan division's office. It's 11 o'clock at night. I'm literally falling asleep because I'm so, jet lagged. And the meeting hadn't started yet. I'm like, oh my God.
Oh my God.
The way business is done is so different. Decision making, nobody can make a decision. And that's could be a cultural, company culture thing of no one can make a decision because it might be wrong. And I was one of just make a decision and move on to the next.
Chop, people. Let's get this done.
Let's get it done.
So you're in this foreign country. You're there to do what you do. and you just have to filter it to someone else and then they present it? Is that how
that was very specific in Egypt. That's the way that worked. In Dubai, that was not the way it worked. I had full, if the chairman said this 3 towers of 20 floors looks like, a hospital inside, go make it look pretty. What does that mean? It meant, and this was a recession here, it was the Great Recession. So I was able to keep designers and suppliers and a lot of consultants busy helping me. We'd send over containers full of silk trees and paintings and chairs. And then suddenly the 20 towers, you get off the elevator and you're not in a hospital, you're suddenly in a residential, a residential tower, those kinds of things. He'd send us in to redo hotel lobbies that didn't feel right for him. I worked on the Burj, which is now the Burj Khalifa, on their apartments. And then Lang Luxury actually had the floor 108, 109 as the highest residential unit in the world. We did the architectural design. We never got to execute it. I don't know what's going on those floors now, but
wow.
Yes, it was a great experience and really life, those kinds of life experiences you can't get anywhere else. And it was a little crazy time. If you ask my girls, they will say, yeah, mom wasn't around a lot in those years. And but it was a recession and we do what we think we need to do. And it was a very happy day when I heard from Tom and Larry and Joe Davis and Wayne Stelmar that they were putting the band together again for the new home company. So
that's pretty exciting. That's pretty exciting. Well, let's transition a little bit to women in leadership, because I think it's a perfect transition coming out of that. As you were kind of growing up through your career, what are the key things that you sort of face, challenges, and what are some kind of things you would share or recommend for women, in their career, not even just starting out? Because I believe this series isn't just for the young leaders, but it's for leaders like me who are like, oh my God, Joan Webb is like a rock star. Like, how
here's the deal, right? I wouldn't go to Saudi Arabia. I wouldn't even consider it, because my threshold was that if I needed a man to sign my exit visa to get out of the country, sorry, not going. And I used to get into this all the time with the chairman. Yeah, I mean, now as an American tourist, it was I didn't need a man, but that was my example, because if I was a Saudi woman, I could not leave the country without my uncle, father, brother signing my exit visa. So that was like my protest. Okay,
like so
not.
So and, rule number one.
So rule number one: don't go to a country that you can't exit on your own behalf. Yeah. So challenges. I honestly, Mollie, have been so blessed in my career that I worked with men that always were uplifting for me and opened doors. I mean, how fortunate am I? And we talked a little bit offline about culture, about company cultures. And, I still hear the term boys club culture. And I was blessed. And I think I also made decisions that enabled me to work at companies that did not have that culture. And if anything, opened doors. So my challenges were more in winning over, hearts and minds of construction guys, of understanding that we could have a high level of personalization in these multi-million-dollar homes and still deliver it on budget and on schedule. And once you win people's trust, and the only way you can do that is by proving yourself, right? Having the right systems in places and actually doing as you say you're going to do. Then it was easy. And to have the opportunity to work with the same team through many, many years, that's like the best. So I feel super fortunate that I had those opportunities to grow. And, it was a decision way back when really at Lang, and part of their leadership program, what did I want to do? What was my next step? I mean, I ran sales, marketing, and design for the luxury division. Did I want to run a division? And it was a very tough decision for me, but in the end, I decided that I loved what I did. I did not need to be in the land deal. I did not need to, I didn't, there were things about that particular job. And I look back and think maybe I made a mistake not going for it. So blah, blah, blah. I could be that further up. I mean, I met my goals, but what became clear and why it became my passion to speak up for women in the business was because that I saw so many companies around me that my colleagues did not have those same opportunities. So when I stepped in as chair of the Orange County BIA, you get to create your own agenda and your own platform. And so it was very, very clear. I had just lost my late husband in a bicycle accident. Smart streets, safety was a big part of my platform. Women in home building was my other, and the next generation. And so what was born out of that was I wanted to put together a women in home building conference, and I wanted it to be knock your socks off. I thought at the time only last 5 years, because the goal was very clear. I just wanted the conversation to start in boardrooms of what is standing in the way of women breaking through into the C-suite. That was my goal. And I said, if we can't even just start talking about it within 5 years, then I failed, and we shouldn't carry on with the conference. The first year we had 300 people at Bowers Museum. We've grown it to 800 people. We didn't stop
phenomenal.
We didn't stop at 5 years. The conversations did happen, but what the voices came back to us said was, this was such a special day. Don't stop it. Keep inspiring us, keep us moving forward, keep the voices up. And and then probably the most rewarding thing that happened was in its first year, we had a CEO who, for the first time, invited all the women in the company to lunch. And he sat there and said, I'm going to be like on this panel at this women's conference. You need to.
Who was it?
Well, I don't know if
That's okay.
And it was not my husband. And he ended up getting these huge messages. He had no idea that women were facing some of the challenges that they shared with him. And so it was so exactly on what our goal was for the conference that I could have stopped there, and I felt like I would have won the lottery.
So just to kind of recap, so here you were, a woman in a much more male-dominated world, and you've had lots of champions in your lives, and you haven't really had to face maybe that sort of male-female thing that you're hearing from, colleagues or friends, and yet you're hearing this. Let me ask you this. What do you hear is sort of the most common complaint or common challenge? And what do you think are the most common solutions, or in all of this sort of the leadership sort of summits that you've had, which have been phenomenal, by the way, like what are the big takeaways as you're sort of going through some of this? And to some degree, I think it's an education both directions. To your point, in your first summit, it is like, no, this is real. Like, this is what's going on. What are some of those takeaways?
I think, and what I hear, and it's today, and it was, 8 years ago, is it's a boys' club. What does that mean? That means for whatever is going on in the organization, women did not feel comfortable in that they could be a part of the team, of the inner team. So what does that look like? That looks like the guys always go for lunch and they never invite me. And let's say they're a senior planner, whatever level in the organization, I've had so many women tell me, I'm never invited. They go out for drinks or they go out for lunch. And then that's this feeling of I'm not good enough, or the messaging is I will never be able to be that guy who gets much more time with the leaders of the company. So how will they ever see the gifts that I'm bringing to the table if they don't know me like they know all those guys?
Right.
That I think is probably the most typical challenge that I see, at least in our business. I think some leaders are just unaware that that impacts people when they see the same group go out to lunch together every day. It's just a whole inclusion, right? That's why it's not just equity, it's inclusion. And there's a lot of words that kind of couch that. And so what are the solutions? It's always just sit down and talk, right? Talk to your manager, talk to your vice president, talk to the president if they have an open door policy, which in this day and age, if they don't, they're crazy. And that's always my solution is they may be so oblivious that they don't know they're doing that. And
right.
It's always the question to ask is, what can I do to take the next step? I don't think, even with working with the best guys in the industry, I think there was only one occasion that I got a raise and a promotion that I didn't ask for. Maybe one. It was at Taylor Woodrow. Yep. I
totally agree.
Vice president. A single, including Larry Webb and the new home company, I had to ask for every job, every promotion, every raise that I got. And I always felt really loved and respected, but that doesn't mean I didn't have to ask for what I wanted.
Well, it's really interesting. So 2 parts to that. The sort of going to lunch and being part of the boys club. How much of that is like formative, right? Like when you look at sort of, grade school, high school, college, like guys are going to hang out with guys, girls are going to hang out with girls. And then there are those times where you come together, right? And so it's a very natural thing, I think, for guys to hang out with guys to go grab a bite or whatever. But is it that, or do you think it's a selective choice? Like, hey, he or she isn't smarter, so we're not including him.
I think it's really unique to the organization, and the ones that I've seen, it's not just that the guys like each other because they like the gals. They just, I think it's an oblivious factor of understanding what their actions, what the impact is on those around them that might watch this and then assume it's a boys club and assume that they can never take that next step up.
I mean, you're one of those people, Joan, that it blows my mind how much you've done, how courageous you are, just your natural leadership ability. It's born in you.
Oh, thank you.
And so as you go back to when you were younger, whatever age you want to pick, were you always this way?
I don't know. My parents really raised, I have a brother and a sister, and I'm the baby, really raised us to just find whatever. They didn't care what it was. They didn't care if it was underwater basket weaving, as long as I was passionate about it and did the best I could in underwater basket weaving. They didn't care. They just wanted me to find something I was passionate about. And I think that really, really, really stuck with me through my life. And when I look back and think about that, my entry into the business was on the design studio side, which some people just discount and go, oh my God, what, carpet and, pillow welts. The studio really touches every segment of the building process.
Sure. Absolutely.
From buyer experience to very much integrated with construction to customer care and to, in the end, the entire buyer experience, and then for years to come. And so I think that really helped me get such a grasp on everything. And I think about in 1987, I remember walking into a conference room at Signature Homes, and Bert Silva was part of that process. So I got to
really
from the very beginning. Yes, with
Bert.
both of our stops on our way.
Nice.
And the only women that I saw that had the gravitas and kind of some power and decision making were all our consultants. They were all women that were entrepreneurs that had their own business. I remember Sandy Keating, in marketing, and designers who own their own interior design firm. And, kind of that was the mold. And the women in the office were all in support roles. And I do remember thinking, well, that's pretty interesting. I did not have a desire to have my own company. I was 27, and I just took it all in and just thought, I just really want to be at the head of the conference room table. That was something that very
that
much
was in your mind from the very beginning, like as you walked in. Okay.
Yeah, I wanted my voice heard. And I think maybe that from my human rights background, it's all about getting your voice heard, right? When governments mistreat their citizens, who has to speak up? You have to speak up and be heard. So I think that kind of taught me, well, wait, I think there's a better way of doing something. I just want to be heard, right?
Right.
So if you ask, has it always been with me? That desire has always been with me.
I totally get that. I mean, I want not even just to be heard, but I want it to always be fair. Like I'm going to fight for the fair thing. Right. And that's really interesting. So that's always kind of been ingrained in you from the beginning. Now, you're the youngest of three. Was there any of that dynamic in your family too? I mean, like, darn it, I want to be heard amongst this group of five.
I couldn't even compete. My brother, who is now a retired psychiatrist, he was going to be the doctor of the family, right? Every nice Jewish family has to have the doctor. So thank God he took that one. My sister is a very talented artist, but has chosen a very different life path. And for the last 35 years has lived in Israel, a very different path. And so it was me. And so they always felt I was the baby. I always got away with everything. I didn't have it tough. That was kind of the signal. I think my parents were shocked that I actually got through UCLA. And they just knew I would do something, but they were never sure. So no, I was the baby that probably got the easiest in the family.
But all three have done something really remarkable. I mean, that's kind of very interesting when you look at the three paths you've taken. They're very different, but quite remarkable.
Completely different. Yes.
That's kind of neat. So if you were to kind of look at sort of your relationship with your parents, would they say you were the one who got everything, or would you say that? So like my parents will say like, boy, you were a fighter from the beginning, or, like you've always been sort of, athletic and, I'm always sort of pushed to win kind of a thing, but in a competitive spirit.
Yeah, I mean, my mother often, who's 95 and still with us, she often reflects that my best friend growing up on our little cul-de-sac in Orange, California, when there are actually orange groves across the street, was a young gal. Her name was Debbie, and she had a huge disability. I didn't know she had talk about being colorblind. For me, she didn't walk like I walked. But my mom said I was her biggest protector. And I do remember
that's awesome,
chasing the kids away from her. So I think that might be a little part of the path of when you talk about being fair and being heard. That was what I think kind of drove me.
Yeah. I love that. But as you were younger, sort of growing up, did you have any sort of like role models or people that you sort of looked up to that, wow, I'm going to be like that one day, or any of that?
When I think about childhood heroes, for me, I think they really formed later in college. I did have a professor at UCLA that really made a huge impression on me. I was the student that never went for office hours with professors. I was afraid of them, or I don't know, too intimidating or something. And one particular professor actually took interest in me as a student, which I had never had. I mean, you're in classes with hundreds of people. And this happened to be a small class in my field of study, which was political science. And he took an interest, was always asking me what my plans were, what was I interested in. And he became pretty pivotal for me as I developed, I think, as an adult. and I've always looked up to him. I've stayed in contact with him, and he really changed. He changed my life. He was the one that introduced me into the world of human rights, and basically taught me that I could change the world, and it just takes one voice. So that was pretty cool. Larry and I joke around about, we're going to have a dinner party someday, and who would we invite to our dinner party? And we banter back and forth between our sports friends and our political friends. And yes, Michelle and Barack would be at our dinner party. For sure. Bill I would have Hillary too. Larry disagrees with me on Hillary, but I would really like to have Hillary at the dinner party.
I would too.
Kobe for sure. I mean, that would be miraculous, but we have discussions about that all the time. And that's basically, so who is it that has impacted our life or that we look up to?
Yeah. That's so interesting. Well, let's, I want to do a couple of things about you first, and then we're going to jump back to women's leadership, because I think that's such a big part of not just your story, but I think it's an important thing to talk about today. But as we talk about you specifically, I'd like to ask you a couple of just personal questions. So favorite pastime. What do you and Larry love to do today?
We golf. Isn't that just
really? Have you always been a golfer?
Oh, are you kidding me?
Oh, I can't, I'm just not patient enough for golf.
No. It's so funny looking into what the next chapter is, and I'm not going to call it retirement, but that's what we are. When you're a woman and you have not only a career, but you have a family and you have a husband, I think we are at a bit of a disadvantage because we do hold a little more responsibility usually on the home front to balance. And I could never.
Oh, for sure.
Golf? Are you kidding? All these guys would go out golfing like on Mondays and Fridays and cut land deals on the golf course. Like really? Like when
all day Saturday?
Right. Oh yeah, exactly. So I was blessed with a husband that did not, my late husband, John, was not a golfer, but no, Larry introduced me to golf. I thought, why not try it? It's always in beautiful places. It could be something that Larry and I could do. So I thought, I'll give it a try. Oh, for heaven's sake. I'm a nutball. I mean, I'm not good, but I love it. I love that we spend so much time together doing it together. We love traveling and playing, and we just really, we enjoy the time together. And I become a nut. So yes, golf.
Yeah, what about favorite place that you've ever visited? Because I know you guys travel quite a bit.
Ooh, favorite place. It usually involves a coastline. And then it's even better if it has a golf course on the coastline. So we have our favorite places. On the Big Island is a really special place for us. The Dominican is a special place for us. Punta Mita in Mexico is special. We're about to take a 3-week trip to Asia. But probably the place that impacted me the most was our trip to Africa, and I cannot wait until we get back. We were really blessed to be able to go. It was right before the pandemic, and then we got a phone call saying you got to get out because this pandemic is shutting down the world, and we literally were like one of the last flights out of Johannesburg to come home, and so we missed some things. But the people in Africa are probably the best people I've ever met in my life. And
I would love that visit.
Botswana is Zambia, Mozambique. I mean, these places are so beyond stunning. And the animals, of course, the animals are amazing. Sure. It's the people. And
I've heard that.
Can't wait to go back. Yeah.
That's so cool. Let me ask you this. We're going to switch to your favorites. This is always the hardest question, but for you, I'm going to ask you, like, what about favorite projects that you've ever worked on? Do you have one?
Oh, it's so hard, Molly. Well, I would say in my more recent history, I would say Meridian. And
I love Meridian.
You helped me with that consumer research, and we'll never forget what those people said. in those focus groups about storage and about everything, about life. And because that was a very male buyer, it was hysterical to watch. So for those that aren't familiar, Meridian was a very, very high-end attached product in Newport Center, circling Fashion Island. And we couldn't get a lender to partner with us on nobody. They were going to be the highest priced, condominiums in Orange County. And they have views on Newport Country Club and Ocean. And it turned out so incredibly handsome and successful.
Oh, so well done.
I'm very proud. I'm very proud of that. I'm proud that it was basically a design build by our team and our contractors, but really our design studio designers took every single one of those buyers through basically a design build process, and had never been done like that before. And I'm really, really proud of the results that that came about. So that was. Go ahead.
How many were moved down buyers from their surrounding area?
All of them.
So you know what was the most remarkable takeaway for me on doing those groups was, I remember when we were looking for the audience to invite to those groups, and it was like, would somebody from Big Canyon really move down here or Newport Coast? And I mean, I've never, ever in my life done groups where I've had more people try to hunt me down and figure out how to get to Joan so that they could buy a house and be first on the list. I mean, it was like people were like offering. I'm like, no, not affiliated with a company. And I started an interest list for you. I'm like, I'm just going to like lob you over to Joan. But I just remember thinking like, wow, I could not believe the response. I think we were all a little surprised by it.
We were all a little surprised. And we were, if you recall, we were under a huge deadline. We couldn't get anyone out on the site during construction, but yet we needed to close homes, within a very tight window, and basically pre-sale and get them through the design process in a very tight time frame. And we did it. It was hysterical because I personally met with some of those buyers up front. It was all men. Men wanted to leave the big house, and the women preferred not to because it was all about storage. So the men would come to the first two meetings.
And outdoor space, so I remember being a very
outdoor space discussion. Too. That guys would come, they would get hooked, and what a great lifestyle. Then we'd see the wife, and then they would get we made some architectural changes to accommodate just enormous closets in an attached product to get them comfortable with the storage and the lifestyle. It was lifestyle. And for whatever reason, it was an easier jump for men to make from a single family detached to that at that point in their lives. It was fascinating. And all in all, the people that have bought Meridian have definitely made more money than we ever made as a company on the project, because the resale values are crazy.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that was beautiful.
That's what home builders do. We make money for our buyers, not so much for ourselves.
It's true. Bill Pulte said if he bought one house from every project he sold, he'd be much richer. Right. I was like, right. Well, and I think that's why, and we talked about this just before our discussion here, is the importance of science and art. Let's talk about that for a little bit. Is one more important? I'd love to hear your opinion on that. Which do you think is more important, or is either one more important?
In our industry, I think we need both. We learned early on that we could not just design to everything we would hear in a focus group. And we were crazy about consumer research, as you know. And if we did that, we could really risk the success of the project. So we had to get all that in, and then get all of the science in, and have it out, and figure out what the best way forward was. So I really think we need both. What scares me a little bit about what I see today is that, once again, I mean, how many recessions have we worked through, Mollie? I mean,
right.
Many that I see once again, and I'm so damn disappointed that companies are running away from some of the best practices that we learned in this last great market. And it's sad. And what do I mean by that? I have heard, and of course I'm more in tune with the design studio side of the business and sales and marketing as well. But, companies are throwing out the design studio and choice. It's much better. It's much faster. It's blah, blah, blah. It's more efficient. It's this, it's that. People don't want choice. I have heard every excuse in the book, even at what I would consider luxury housing levels, to just give them packages. It's faster. They like it better, blah, blah, blah. And technology. So both on choice, I see people running away from it now that things are a little tougher and they want it more operationally efficient. And then technology. I think we're still light years away. I do think the pandemic gave us all an incredible learning opportunity of how on a dime we had to change our business model. And how refreshing was that to actually be able to convince people, okay, we don't need the models open. We don't need the salesperson sitting in the models, but we do need to figure out how to give our people access, right, on their own time. And let's get all these Matterport tours out there and get all of this technology in their hands. And we actually did it as an industry. Hallelujah. That's great. Don't lose that. And I think a lot of those lessons are not being lost and are continuing. But I think we are woefully, woefully behind on introducing technology into how we build our homes. And I'm not talking about like the lighting and the, keyless pads and blah, blah, blah. I'm talking about especially in affordability and in the higher end, is how to introduce faster, better ways of building. And we know the answers are there. And we always compare ourselves, or we don't compare ourselves, to the auto industry of how do they come out with these new models and better technology every year. And somehow they figure it out. And we're just a little bit of a dinosaur on that. So.
And then on that note, going to the design center piece of it, so we have lots of numbers on that, and there's a huge number that say I want to be able to pick every piece, and then there's a huge number that says I want packages. Let me ask you this: is there room for both? Can you say like, hey, we've curated these packages, but you can also have your individual choice if you can do all that, right? So what are the advantages and disadvantages to both?
In a perfect world, you have both for certain price points. I think in the luxury market, don't even bother, because they're going to tear the packages apart, no matter how beautifully curated, no matter if I, hire Philippe Stark to put it together. I mean, just it doesn't matter. But
they'll go design center.
Correct. But in move up housing, the idea of not giving an a la carte menu along with the curated packages, to me, is just a huge miss. Not just on profit. If you do it right, it's all about having the systems. And when builders say you're costing me 10 days, well, guess what? Then the system is not put the design people that have not done their jobs to figure it out and get it on time. That was always my mantra. Do not cost those guys a day. Otherwise, we're done. We don't have a job.
And that's a great answer, because that is financially driven, return on investment driven, and yet customer driven. And so
the customer driven part, really, yes, it's customer driven, but it's really builder driven, because I can tell you, Molly, for all that customization we did, we had one of the lowest can rates in the industry. And that was because people fell in love with their homes. They were emotionally invested. And to top it off, it was the damn landscaping that actually got them most invested, and
really
the least amount of cancellations, because it's done, right? Your home is done and you move in. So I really think it's that key to personalization. Yes, you're making your buyer feel good that it's their own and they've put their hand on. And sometimes there's really special needs. You have a special need child. You need special needs in your home. What builder can embrace that and go, we're going to do everything to make your life better? I mean, how cool is that?
Oh, that totally touches my heart.
So, yeah, it's doing both. I understand people like packages. I also think that don't lose it all in your efficiency about choice.
So let me ask you, as we wrap up, I'd love to ask you, who are your inspirational leaders? And I'd love to have, one that is like female inspirational leader, and then just given our discussion on women in leadership, and you've had such a huge role in that. And then just kind of, who inspires you today and why?
Oh, well, I would, I know this has come as a huge shock for people, but my husband,
not a shock at all. Amazing man.
Before I worked for John Lang, people would say, have you ever heard Larry Webb speak? And I'd be like, no, I never heard him speak. It was at a time in my life where I was not involved with the BIA or not going to conferences, or who knows, I was raising 2 daughters and being crazy. And people would just go, oh, he's like, you need to meet Larry Webb, right? So Larry at that point in time would meet with any new employee that would come into the company. And, he had 1,000+ employees. And I came into his office, and he didn't ask me a question about my career. And I'm like, who is this man? Like, he didn't ask me one freaking work question. He only asked me personal questions like, what do you read? What do you do? What's your history? I don't want to hear about work. I only want to hear about you as a person. And I'm like thinking, this guy cannot be for real. I walked out of that and telling my husband, John at the time, I am sure I didn't get this job because he didn't want to talk about, my career. Well, of course he didn't want to talk about my career because that's who Larry is, right? It was all about the person and making sure that the person was the right fit for the company, and how inspiring that was, and how it kind of changed, I think, how I viewed, I always felt that getting the right people on the bus, thank God for Jim Collins, and that brilliant, parody is, you got to get the right people on the bus. And then listening to Larry through the years and watching him, it was all about doing the right thing. And yes, I had been with great people. I'd follow, obviously, Tom Redwitz to the ends of the earth. I did through 3 companies, and what a great partnership, because he was so brilliant, is brilliant with his eye and his knowledge and his demeanor and his professionalism. Talk about being lucky to work for the kinds of men that I got to work with.
He does have a neat demeanor.
He does. Very just sweet. And cared. He was the first person on my doorstep when I lost John. Yeah, I'm not going to get emotional on that one. So to work with those kinds of people, how incredibly fortunate am I? But Larry's inspirational ability is something that I could only aspire to be as inspirational as he is to people. And to have our stories then end up where we're married, that's a whole nother, we would have to have a cocktail.
That could be a whole nother podcast series, right?
But I do also want to mention a woman in my life that was very pivotal was Patty Carmichael. And I don't know if
I love Patty.
Yeah. Yes. So Patty was head of sales and marketing while I was head of design at Lang Luxury. And she suddenly decided, I'm ready to step away. And what did that mean? It meant she came to me and she said, Joan, you have so much more to offer. You need to take on my role. And I'm looking at her going, oh my God, are you kidding? I never thought about that. I'm not a broker. And she worked with me. She was my mentor for many, many months in the transition.
That's a nice lady.
And she believed in me. So again, somebody believed in me that I could do more. And she taught me a life lesson. And that is, I love term limits. So I just think that if I don't get out of the way, no one's going to be able to come up behind me. How is Megan going to be, CMO someday if I go into my grave? I also happen to think that sales and marketing does have an expiration on it. You have to be young. You have to surround yourself. You have to understand pop culture. You have to understand everything that's going on. I agree. I always thought, if I'm in my 50s and I'm still doing this, I'm ancient. Well, here, I stepped away at 61, so I kind of pushed that envelope. Turnaround is huge. I mean, that's why I stepped away from the women's conference as chair. I just felt that if I was true to my word of making pathways for women, that I got to get out of the way. So Patty was really important to me too. So really fortunate to have those kinds of leaders in my life.
Those are both, yeah, great leaders. I don't think you could have picked two better ones. So that's pretty great. Well, Joan, I just can't thank you enough for your time and just spending this time. I could talk to you for 10 hours.
And
I would tell you my big takeaway. There's so many takeaways I have from today's discussion, but I would say the biggest takeaway is probably believe, right? So just kind of believe in your people, believe in yourself, but also just the power of believing and letting people know that they can do it. I mean, from your professor early on, your parents even earlier on, to all these mentors and leaders in your life, giving that person, frankly, that encouragement. It's all about believing, I think, and that goes into so many of the things we discussed today. So so many people believe in you, girl. I mean, thank you. Thank you for spending the time with me.
Thank you. Thanks.
Take care. Yes.
Thank you again for joining us. This is Mollie Carmichael, and I hope you enjoyed this series. Please hit like if you liked today's broadcast and subscribe if you'd like to hear more from the best and the brightest in our industry. Take care, everyone, and I hope you join us again next time.